This problem is from Giesecke Technical Drafting, 15th edition, Chapter 6, Exercise 6.5-4. One of the things that I recommend doing is to start with one circle or one line or one rectangle and dimension it immediately so that you have a sense of scale for the rest of your sketch. Now I'm going to turn on the visibility of the origin geometry, and this time I'm going to go over to the right side view on the view cube. I'm going to right click on this right side plane and I'll select create sketch, and then I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to put one corner of the rectangle at the origin, and I'll come down to the right. And so then I'm going to dimension this immediately. So don't sketch a bunch of geometry and then start dimensioning the geometry. It can make things more complicated. So I draw one circle, one line, or one rectangle and dimension it immediately. So I'm going to dimension this rectangle, and I'm going to dimension this as a distance of 30. And I'm going to dimension the height of this a distance of 35. So if I look at my view cube then, so looking from the right side, so I've got my height that I'm doing is 35, and then the distance from front, this is the front of the view cube, and then on the other side the back, so from the front to the back a distance of 30. It turns black, letting me know that it's all fully defined. I'm going to draw another rectangle, and I'm going to draw that rectangle from about right here, and be careful you don't snap to the midpoint of this line. So I'm going to come up about right here, and I'm going to come over about right there. Now I could have drawn that as 3 separate lines, but it's fewer clicks to draw it as just a simple rectangle. Then I'm going to dimension the distance from this line to the bottom. That distance is 10. I'm going to dimension from here over to here. I'll do that dimension as 10 as well. And then I'm going to do the dimension from here up to here. I'll do that dimension as 10. Okay, I will rotate around. If I go to the isometric view, I will finish this sketch. I'll save the file, and I recommend that every time you do something right that you save it. You don't want to lose any work. I'm going to do extrude, and I'm going to extrude this, and I'll extrude that out at a distance of 70. And I'll put in 70, and I did something right, so I save it. Alright, then I'm going to go around to the front view and do my next sketch. When I do my next sketch, and I could have done that sketch before I created this geometry, I'm going to do that on this front plane. Now I could do it on the face of the part, but later on if you make changes, it's more robust to use the origin planes rather than use the faces of the part to do your sketches. So I'm going to do a new sketch on this front plane. So I'll go around to the front view, I'll right click, and I'll select create sketch. I'm then going to draw a line, and I want it to be from the edge of this, and it may or may not pick up the edge of the part. If it doesn't, we will put that in later. So I'm going to come down, and I'm going to come down about like that, and notice this symbol is putting a vertical constraint on this line as I draw this line, and then if I come over, it's putting a perpendicular. It'll either do a perpendicular or a horizontal constraint, and I'm going to come down to this line, and it may or may not snap to that line depending on how you have Fusion 360 set up. And I want to come to this corner, and I'm going to come up to this corner and back over to close that off. Alright, if I try to drag these lines, so the first step I said was to put in a dimension so that you have a sense of scale. So we have a sense of scale of our object now. And then the second, the most important tip, and actually this might be really the most important tip, when the lines don't change color to black, one of the things you might want to do is drag an endpoint. If I drag the endpoint, I see that this line isn't staying horizontal and it's supposed to be horizontal. And so I'll select the horizontal vertical constraint, I'll select that line, and now it's forced, it puts a horizontal constraint on there. And then next I want this line to stay lined up with this, or I could say stay lined up with that origin point. And I prefer to use the origin point rather than the top of the part. I'm going to say coincident, I want this line to be lined up with the origin point, so that moves it down. And then I'm going to put some dimensions on here, and I'm going to dimension this distance. And I think actually what I want to do is dimension that from the bottom up. So I'm going to undo that dimension. And let's work our way from the bottom up. So I'm going to dimension from here down to the bottom of the part. And I want that distance to be 10, so it moves it up. So I actually could have made that line coincident with this line. And I think that's what I'll do here in a minute. And then I want this distance from here to here to be 20. And so that moves up that height. I want this distance from here over to here to be 20. And I want this distance from here over to here to be 30. Okay, notice that if I drag this can still move. I want it coincident here, and also I said earlier that I want this line to be along this line, so we really don't need that dimension. So I'm going to delete that dimension, and so if I drag this, notice, so I really want that to be right there at that point, and I may or may not be able to get it to snap there. If it doesn't snap there, I'll do coincident, and I'll select this point. I want that coincident with this point right here. Notice now that it turns black, that it's all fully constrained. I'm going to rotate this around a little bit so we can see, perhaps we can see what we have better. So we have this profile right here that we're going to extrude. So I'll finish sketch. I'm going to do extrude, and I want this to cut back through the part, and I want it to go all the way through the part. So for the distance, I'll tell it to go through all. And the reason I don't type in a distance is we might make a change where the distance from front to back of the part changes. I want that to always go through all, even if we change that distance from the front to the back. Okay, so now we see we've made that cut, and then I'm going to go to the top view, and if you're following along from the book, you see how this is starting to resemble the problem in the book. And again, I could start a new sketch on the face of the part, but I prefer to use only the origin planes if possible to do my sketching. So I'm going to right click on the top plane, and I'll tell it to do create a sketch, and I'm going to draw a line or draw a circle. And actually I really was tempted, and I think I'll do it. I want the second circle to be straight over from this circle. So if you don't see a tracking line, you can just hesitate over the center of that circle, and you'll see a tracking line. And I want to make sure that those stay lined up. So I'm going to draw a line from the midpoint of this circle to the midpoint or center point of that circle. I could change this to a construction line, although it doesn't really matter. If I want to change it to a construction line, right click on it, and you can change that from, or toggle it back and forth between a normal and construction line, so construction line is dashed. I'll then put in the distance between centers, so I'm going to dimension that circle and that circle. The distance between centers I want to be 20. I want the diameter of this circle to be 10. And then I want the distance from the front of the part to the center of the circle, I want that distance to be 15. Okay, and I see that it's still blue, and so I need one more dimension to locate this. So I'm going to dimension it from the center of the circle over to the edge of this part. I'll dimension that distance as 10. I see that this one has turned black, but this one has not turned black. So when a geometry doesn't change black and you expect it to, just drag the geometry, and right away you should be able to see the issue. The intention was for this to be equal to that circle, so we'll do it equal this circle equal to that circle. So those two major tips: dimension some geometry immediately so you'll have a sense of scale for the rest of your sketch, and then when geometry doesn't fully constrain, drag the geometry and you can see what is needed in order to fully constrain that geometry. I'll rotate around. I'll finish this sketch. I did a few things right, so let's save it. And I'll extrude this circle and this circle. I want to cut these as holes through the part, and I want those to go all the way through. Okay, so now I have completed this geometry. We can see it from the front view. We see it from the right side view, and we see it from the top view. So there's how our geometry looks. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the origin by clicking on this light bulb, and I'll save it and then create my drawing. So I need a 2D drawing to document this, so I'll go to the drop down under design. I'm going to do a drawing from this design. I'm going to use the ASME standard. I have a metric drawing, and I'm going to do 11 an A size or 11 by 8.5 sheet of paper. I'll place my front view, but I want to make that 1:1 scale, so I'm going to come over here and I'll change that to 1:1 scale. And so I'll click here for my first view, and I'll say OK to that. And then I'm going to do a projected view. I'll project the front view up to the top view and the right side view, and I'll put in an isometric view, right click, say OK to create those 3 views. I'll then go through and put my center marks in. So I'll do center mark on this circle and on this circle, and then I'll do my center lines for this hole and a center line for this hole, and I also have a center line over here in this view. And so those 2 holes are lined up, so there's only one center line in this view. And I'll go through and put my dimensions on the drawing. So I'm going to dimension this line is 70. I'll dimension the height here as 10, and then I'm going to dimension from here to here, and I got the wrong point there. There we go, 20. And then the overall height from here to here. And actually I want it to go down to the bottom, so I think I'll do that again. So I'll do dimension, and I'm going to dimension from here all the way down to the bottom. So I'm going to use the bottom as my datum. I'll select this line, and so that distance 30. I think I'll dimension the distance from front to back. I'll dimension that over here. So I'll dimension this. So here's the front of the part. The front to the back of the part is 30, and I'll think I'll dimension this distance over here as 10. So I have that dimension. I will then dimension this line, and I'll dimension the distance from here over to here. And actually when I did that, I selected the line down here and it didn't put a gap in between here, so I'm going to undo that. See, I want a gap in between the object line and the extension line, so I'm going to dimension that again, and I'm going to select it up here. So if I select this line up here or select a point, I'm going to select this line, and I'll select this line over here, and then when I put in this 30, I see that it preserves that gap in between the extension line and the object line. So I have these gaps. That's the way it should look. And then I want to dimension one of these circles for the diameter. I want the distance between centers, so from here to here, that distance, and I get that circle twice, this circle and then that circle, and let me undo that. It might be better if I select the center points. So I'll select the center point from here over to here, and that distance is 20. And then I want the distance from here up to here, and that distance is 15. Alright, let's re-examine this, make sure that I have all the dimensions, and I see that I'm missing one dimension from here to here or over here, so let's put in that dimension as well. The distance from here to here, that distance is 10, and I might want to move that over here onto this side, so drag that dimension over on this side. I'll drop it here, and I go around and examine. I might want to move this over a little bit closer. I might want to move this dimension over here, and so let's do that. So I'm going to move this dimension in closer, right there. And so, whoops, I hit the wrong key, and I'll dimension this dimension, or move that over. So I'm trying to make the drawing look aesthetically pleasing or easy to read, so that no dimensions are missed when the machinist goes to make this part. I want to make sure that all the information is needed and that it's clearly given. I want to put in that last dimension, that dimension from here to here. I'll put it over here on this side, and I might after I put it in, I might move that down here. Okay, so that is exercise 6.5-4.